I paid for her operation. He beat me at the sink. They didn't know the police were already listening again. If you've ever covered the cost while they cursed you, if you've ever been punished for helping, then keep listening. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when the invisible daughter tracks the receipts, and what she does when the wire finally catches it all. My name is Grace Langston. I'm 36 years old, and my world is one of numbers, spreadsheets, and the silent, unyielding logic of a balance sheet. As an internal auditor for a renewable energy conglomerate, my job is to find what doesn't add up, to trace the quiet outflow of assets that bleeds a company dry from the inside. I follow the money because money never lies. It leaves a trail of receipts, transfers, and digital footprints that tell the real story, the one people try so desperately to hide behind pleasantries and plausible deniability. It's a skill I never thought I'd have to bring home. The call came on a Tuesday. The rain outside my St. Louis office window streaked the glass like glycerin tears. It was my mother, Linda. Her voice was a thin, afraid thread trying to hold itself together. Gracie, honey, it's just a little procedure. The doctor says it's routine. Nothing about a triple bypass is routine. I could hear the lie in her voice, the same one she used whenever she tried to smooth over the cracks in her life with Rick Madsen, her second husband. What do the financials look like? Mom, I asked, cutting through the pretense. My tone was gentle but firm, the same one I used when questioning a department head about a questionable expense report. A pause. A shaky breath. Well, Rick's insurance, it's good. It is? But there's a gap. A rather large one. How large? Another pause, longer this time. I heard muffled sounds, the rustle of paper. She was hiding in the pantry again, the only place in that house where she felt safe enough to have a private conversation. $17,384, she whispered. The precision of the number told me she'd been staring at it for days, the digits burned into her memory. My own heart, the healthy one, gave a painful thud. It wasn't the amount that scared me. I was good at my job, careful with my money. I could cover it. It was the implication. It was Rick. I'll handle it, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, mirroring hers. I'll wire it directly to the hospital's billing department. But you have to promise me something. You cannot tell Rick. Not a word. Let him think the insurance covered more than he expected. Let him think anything, but not that I paid. Oh, Grace. I don't know. Mom, promise me. The urgency in my voice was sharp. You know how he gets about money, about control. This will just be our secret, please. She finally agreed, her voice thick with a gratitude that felt heavier than any debt. I hung up, pulled up my banking portal, and initiated the wire transfer. The numbers flowed from my account to the hospital's as smoothly and impersonally as water down a drain. $17,384, a keystroke, an act of love, a secret that felt like a ticking bomb. The surgery was a success. Mom came through it, pale and weak, but alive. Rick was a model of the concerned husband at the hospital. His hand was always on her arm, his voice a low, soothing rumble for the nurses. He brought her flowers, read to her from magazines, and spoke glowingly of their future. He was a pillar of the Maplewood community, a retired serviceman who volunteered at the church food pantry. He had a firm handshake, a ready smile, and eyes that could turn to chips of ice in a heartbeat. I watched his performance, my stomach in a tight knot. I'd seen this act before. It was always the prelude. A week later, Mom was home, settled in a recliner in the living room, a mountain of pillows around her. I'd been staying with them, sleeping on the pull-out sofa, making her meals, and monitoring her medication. The house was quiet, tense. Rick was being helpful, almost unnervingly so. The bomb hadn't gone off. I started to let myself believe, foolishly, that maybe it wouldn't. The explosion came, as it always did, in the kitchen, the heart of the home. I was at the sink, rinsing out a mug, the warm water a comfort on my hands. Rick came in waving a piece of paper. It was the itemized bill from the hospital. My blood went cold. "Explain this, Grace," he said. His voice wasn't loud yet. It was worse. It was low, menacing, coiled like a snake. I just got off the phone with the insurance company. They paid their part. Exactly what they said they would. But this hospital bill says balance due 0. I kept my back to him, my eyes fixed on the suds swirling down the drain. Maybe they made a mistake. A clerical error. I don't believe in clerical errors that large. He stepped closer. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I believe in secrets. I believe in you going behind my back, undermining me in my own home, making me look like I can't provide for my own wife. That's not what happened, I said, my voice quiet. I turned off the water, the silence of the room suddenly deafening. Then what happened, he snarled, shoving the paper into my shoulder. Where did $17,000 come from? Grace, did it fall from the sky? I turned to face him, my hands gripping the edge of the granite countertop. I paid it. Mom needed the surgery. It's done. It doesn't matter. His face, which had been a mask of performative concern for a week, melted away. What was left was ugly, contorted with a rage that was terrifyingly familiar. It doesn't matter, he hissed, his voice cracking with fury. You think you can just waltz in here with your big corporate job, and throw money around. You think that makes you better than me. You are a parasite living off your mother's affection, poisoning her against me. That's insane. Rick, I was helping. You were interfering, he roared, and his hand came up so fast I didn't have time to flinch. The slap was a crack of sound that echoed in the small room. My head snapped to the side, my cheekbone erupting in a blaze of fire. It was the third time this year. The first had been over a supposedly extravagant grocery bill. The second, because I'd replaced a burnt-out coffee maker without asking his permission. This was the third, for saving my mother's life. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my bicep-like claws, and shoved me back against the sink, the edge of the counter digging into my spine. You listen to me, he spat, his face inches from mine, his breath sour with coffee and righteousness. You will never ever go behind my back again. This is my house, my wife, my finances. You are nothing here. Do you understand me? Nothing. He let go with a final, violent push. I stumbled, my hip knocking against the dishwasher. He stood there for a second, breathing heavily, his chest puffed out like a conquering hero. Then he smoothed down his shirt, turned, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the throbbing pain in my face and the cold, hard certainty of what I had to do. I slid down to the cool linoleum floor, my cheek pressed against a cabinet door. The tears wanted to come, hot and useless, but I held them back. Crying wouldn't help. Crying was a liability. Auditing was an asset. My gaze drifted across the room, past the stainless steel appliances and the cheerful, homey rooster-themed decor Mom loved so much. It landed on a small power adapter plugged into the wall behind the fruit bowl. It was a simple black USB charger, the kind you see everywhere. Except this one wasn't just a charger. After the first time he'd hit me in this very spot, my head striking the swan neck faucet of the sink, I'd gone online. I'd done my research. I'd spent $45 on a device that looked innocuous, but contained a high-fidelity, voice-activated microphone. It had been plugged in for 2 months, silently waiting. He didn't know. He thought this was just another Tuesday, another outburst he could smooth over with a grudging apology to my mother later. He thought I was just the quiet, invisible daughter, the one who paid the bills and absorbed the blows. He didn't know that this time, when he raised his hand, there was a witness. A silent digital witness that recorded every word, every threat, every sickening crack of impact. He didn't know the audit had already begun. To the outside world, Rick Madsen was a rock. He was the man you'd want on your side in a crisis. His photo, a handsome shot from his army days, sat on the mantelpiece, a constant reminder of his service in Maplewood. He was known for his firm, calloused handshake and the easy, crinkling smile he'd give neighbors over the back fence. On Sundays, he was an usher at the Presbyterian church, his broad shoulders filling out a navy blue blazer, as he handed out bulletins with a solemn, reverent air. People would stop my mother in the grocery store, pat her hand, and tell her how lucky she was. That Rick, they'd say, is one of the good ones, a true patriot. He just adores you, Linda. And she would smile, a practiced, fragile little smile, and agree because in public, he did adore her. He was a master of the grand, visible gesture. He'd bring her a single, perfect rose for no reason, and make sure the delivery man saw him do it. He'd mow the lawn of the elderly widow next door, and accept her thanks with a humble dip of his head. He was building a fortress of public goodwill, brick by painstaking brick, and it was impenetrable. No one would ever believe what happened inside its walls. Behind the locked front door, the rock was a cage. Rick's control was absolute, and his weapon of choice was the household ledger. He wasn't a general anymore, but he ran their lives like a military campaign, and the objective was total financial submission. Every dollar was accounted for. My mother, a woman who had raised me on her own for 15 years while working as a skilled seamstress, was given a weekly allowance in cash, like a child. She had to produce receipts for every purchase, which he would then scrutinize under the harsh light of the desk lamp in his study. Linda, did we really need the brand name olive oil? The store brand is 60 cents cheaper. This coffee seems extravagant. Are you having guests I don't know about? He had maneuvered himself onto all her accounts, citing his head for numbers and her need to relax and not worry about a thing. Her pension, her social security, it all went into a joint account that only he truly managed. Her choices were systematically stripped away, one transaction at a time, until her entire existence was dependent on his approval. My presence, my financial independence, was a threat to that perfect, suffocating control. My paying for the surgery wasn't an act of love in his eyes. It was an act of insurrection. I tried to talk to my mother about it the day after he hit me. The bruise on my cheek was a monstrous, blooming thing, a swirl of purple and angry red that no amount of concealer could fully hide. I found her in the sunroom, a blanket over her lap, pretending to read a magazine. Rick was out volunteering at the food pantry, polishing his halo. Mom, I started, my voice low and shaky. I sat on the ottoman across from her. We need to talk about what happened with Rick. She didn't look up from her magazine. Oh, honey, let's not make a mountain out of a molehill. A molehill? My voice rose, incredulous. He hit me. He slammed me against the sink. Look at my face, I gestured, my hand trembling. She finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke my heart. It wasn't anger or defiance. It was fear. A deep, weary, and profound fear. Grace, you have to understand, she said, her voice a placating whisper. He's under so much pressure. My surgery, the bills, he worries. He just loses his temper when he worries about me. It's because he loves me so much. The rationalization was so twisted, so ingrained, it left me breathless. Love, Mom. That's not love. Love doesn't leave marks like this. He didn't mean it, she insisted, her gaze dropping back to the glossy page. You know he has a short fuse. You shouldn't have paid that bill without talking to him. You know how he is about money. You cornered him. I cornered him. The words echoed in the silent room. I paid $17,000 to save her life, and in her narrative, I was the aggressor. I was the one who had provoked the violence. Rick wasn't the abuser, he was a man reacting predictably to a hostile situation I had created. That evening, the three of us ate dinner in a silence so thick I could feel it pressing on my ears. Rick carved the roast chicken with surgical precision, a benign patriarch presiding over his quiet kingdom. He hadn't apologized. He never did. An apology would be an admission of wrongdoing, and in Rick's world, he was never wrong. He waited until my mother had shuffled off to bed, her pain medication making her drowsy, before he spoke to me. I was loading the dishwasher, the clinking of plates the only sound. "I see you're still here," he said from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, a portrait of casual authority. "Still enjoying the free ride?" I didn't turn around. "I'm here to take care of my mother." "Your mother has a husband to take care of her," he said, his voice hard. "What you're doing is meddling. You come in here with your checkbook, thinking you can buy your way into this family, but all you are is a parasite. You feed off her, drain our resources, and disrupt the peace of this home with your drama." My hands froze over the silverware basket. Parasite. It was his favorite word for me. He saw my help not as a contribution, but as an infestation, an invasive species in the carefully cultivated ecosystem of his control. My success, my ability to stand on my own 2 feet, was a personal insult to him. It highlighted everything my mother had lost. "The only peace you care about," I said, my voice dangerously low, "is the peace that comes when everyone does exactly what you say." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You're learning now. Learn this. Your little stunt with the hospital, Grace, was the last time. From now on, you are a guest here, a temporary one, and you will respect the rules of my house." He walked away, leaving me in the humming silence of the kitchen. I felt utterly, completely alone. My own mother wouldn't or couldn't see the truth. She was a willing prisoner, defending her jailer. To the world, Rick was a saint. To my mother, he was a flawed man driven by love and worry. But I knew better. As I finished loading the dishwasher, and wiped down the counters, my eyes kept flicking to the corner of the room, to the fruit bowl, and the small black USB charger plugged into the outlet behind it. I wasn't alone in this. My mother wasn't my witness. The neighbors weren't my witnesses. But that little microphone was. It didn't rationalize. It didn't make excuses. It didn't reinterpret violence as an expression of love. It just recorded. It had captured his tirade about the bill. It had captured the sound of his palm connecting with my cheek. It had captured his threats, his voice thick with rage, as he pinned me against the sink. It had captured every single damning syllable. He called me a parasite, but a parasite is insidious. It thrives in the dark, unseen, drawing strength from its host until it's strong enough to reveal itself. He had no idea how right he was. I wasn't just a guest in his house. I was an auditor. The dossier was a work of art, a cold, hard monument to Rick's depravity. But it was incomplete. Financial fraud could put him in a courtroom, but it wouldn't necessarily remove him from my mother's life. It wouldn't protect her. The audio file I had was powerful, but it was still just sound. I needed more. I needed something undeniable. I needed a confession, not in words, but in action. I needed a judge and jury to see the mask of the community pillar melt away and reveal the monster underneath. I needed video. My search led me to a dusty office in a strip mall on the outskirts of St. Louis, sandwiched between a bail bondsman and a palm reader. The sign on the door just said Frank Miller. Investigations. Frank was a man who seemed to have been assembled from spare parts of old noir films. A rumpled suit, a face like a road map of bad decisions, and eyes that had seen everything and were impressed by nothing. I didn't give him my real name. I laid out the financial documents on his cluttered desk, the forged loan applications, the bank statements from Patriot Trust, the detailed audit trail I had created. He whistled a low, appreciative sound. "Lady, your boyfriend is a piece of work. This is clean. A DA would sing for this. He's my stepfather." I corrected him. "And this isn't enough. I need to see him in his natural habitat." He leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. "You mean you want visuals of him being a bastard?" "I want a record of it," I said. "Something that can't be explained away. Something my mother can't make excuses for." He nodded slowly. "Understanding. Sound is a he said, she said. Video is a confession." He rummaged through a drawer and produced a small, impossibly tiny black cube, no bigger than a sugar cube. 4K resolution, motion activated, 160-degree field of view. The battery lasts 72 hours on standby. The lens is right there. He pointed to a pinprick hole that was nearly invisible. "You put this somewhere with a clear view of the main living area. The kitchen is usually where the fireworks happen. You come back in a few days, swap out the SD card, and we see what we caught." The next day, I came home with a peace offering, a large, slightly gaudy silk flower arrangement in a heavy ceramic vase for the sunroom. "Mom," I said, giving her a hug, to brighten things up. She loved it. Rick sneered at the expense, but said nothing. That afternoon, while they were both out for one of my mother's follow-up appointments, I went to work. With trembling fingers, I nestled the tiny camera deep within the artificial foliage, its minuscule lens peeking out between a plastic fern leaf and a silk peony. I angled it perfectly to capture the kitchen island, the sink, and the doorway to the living room. It was an unblinking, silent witness, hidden in plain sight. I only had to wait 2 days. The trap was sprung, as I knew it would be, over money. I was in the living room pretending to read, my ears straining for any sound from the kitchen. Mom had been looking over the credit card statement. Her recovery had given her a sliver of her old self back, a tiny spark of defiance. "Rick," I heard her say, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not comfortable with this charge from Apex Founders Group." "What is it?" "It's an investment, Linda. For us, for our future," he replied, his tone patient, patronizing. "It's for $2,000. And I don't remember discussing it," she said. His voice hardened. "I handle the finances, remember, so you don't have to worry." "I'm starting to worry," she said. I think I'd like to hold onto my own credit card for a while." Silence. It was a heavy, dangerous silence. Then, his voice low and venomous. "What did you say?" "I'd like my card back, please." "Has she been talking to you?" he snarled. "Has that parasitic daughter of yours been filling your head with nonsense?" "Grace has nothing to do with this. This is my money. Rick, I'd like control of my own card." Then a crash, the sharp, violent sound of ceramic shattering against a wall. I flinched, my whole body tensing, but I didn't move. I forced myself to stay put, to let the camera do its job. "Don't you ever talk back to me about money," he roared. The sound was terrifying, an animalistic bellow of pure rage. "I put a roof over your head. I saved you from being some lonely old woman. You have nothing without me. You are nothing. You think you can make decisions. You can't even decide what to have for breakfast without me. Now give me that wallet." I heard my mother's small, choked sob. I heard the scrape of a chair. I heard his heavy footsteps. I squeezed my eyes shut, my nails digging into the cover of my book. Stay still, Grace. Stay still. Let it see. Let it watch. Later that night, after he had apologized with a cloying, false sweetness, and she had accepted with a weary resignation, I retrieved the SD card. My hands shook so violently I could barely insert it into my laptop. I put on my headphones and clicked play, and I watched the confession. I saw him loom over her. I saw his face twisted into a grotesque mask of fury. I saw him grab the coffee mug from the counter and hurl it against the backsplash, where it exploded into 100 pieces just inches from her head. I saw her cower, her hands flying up to protect her face. I saw him snatch the wallet from her trembling hands, his movements vicious and predatory. It was 10 times worse than the audio recording. It was irrefutable. The next morning, I walked into the Maplewood Police Precinct with my lipstick tube USB drive and the new SD card. I asked for the detective who had taken my initial assault report months ago. A tired-looking man named Miller. I had been a frantic, tearful mess then. Today, I was ice, I said, sitting across from his desk. I'd like to reopen my case, and I'd like to report ongoing domestic abuse and financial exploitation on behalf of my mother, Linda Madsen. He sighed, pulling up my old file. We went through this without a corroborating witness. I have a witness now, I said, and pushed the USB drive across the desk. This drive contains a complete financial dossier detailing grand larceny, fraud, and forgery, including forged signatures on 2 personal loans. And this, I slid the tiny SD card next to it, is a video of the subject, Rick Madsen, committing an act of violent intimidation against my mother 48 hours ago. He watched the video on his computer, his face grim. He watched it twice. This is good, he said. Finally looking up at me, he said, this is very good. The verbal abuse, the destruction of property, it establishes a pattern. It gives your assault claim more weight. He held up a hand. Not so fast. He didn't physically strike her in this video. A good defense attorney will call this a temper tantrum. What we need is an overt act. We need to catch him in the act of assault or making a direct, credible threat right now. This is enough for a restraining order, maybe, but to put him away, to make it stick, we need more. My hope plummeted. So, what do we do? Miller leaned forward, his eyes fixed on mine. We coordinate. He doesn't know you have this. He doesn't know we are talking. He feels invincible. So, we use that. We want you to wear a wire, a personal recording device monitored by us. We need you to engage him. We need to record him making a direct threat, or admitting to past assaults. If he lays a hand on you while that wire is hot, we'll be through the door before he can even make a fist. A wave of pure terror washed over me, so cold it almost made me gasp. He wanted me to go back in there, to be the bait. But then I looked at the frozen image of my mother cowering on the detective's computer screen. The terror was still there, but beneath it, the cold, hard resolve returned. I met the detective's gaze. I've been wearing a wire for months, I said, my voice steady. The only difference is now someone else will be listening. Becoming the bait is a strange and chilling transformation. You must learn to play the part of the person you used to be, weak, accommodating, and afraid. The difference is that now the fear is a tool, not a prison. I told my mother there was a mandatory fumigation in my apartment building due to a pest issue on another floor. It was a lie, of course, but a plausible one that gave me a 3-day pretext to move back onto the lumpy sofa bed. To Rick, it was a delicious, validating turn of events. The prodigal parasite, forced to return to the host. His smirk was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. Before I returned, I met with Detective Miller again. He handed me the new wire. It wasn't a bulky device from a movie. It was a delicate silver pendant on a simple chain, a tiny stylized bird with a microphone embedded in its chest. It's always on, always listening, he explained. But it only transmits a live signal to the listening post if you activate it. Double tap the bird right on its chest. That's our signal that the situation is escalating and you feel you're in immediate danger. We'll be listening and we can move in. Otherwise, just dock it in this charger at night, and it will upload the day's audio. I put the necklace on. The metal was cool against my skin. It felt both like a target and a shield. My performance began the moment I walked through the door. I made myself smaller, rounding my shoulders and avoiding Rick's gaze. I spoke in a quiet, hesitant voice. I offered to do the dishes, to fold the laundry, to make myself useful. I was playing the part of a daughter beaten into submission, and he consumed it with relish. His chest seemed to puff out a little further whenever I was in the room. He had won. He had broken me. During the day, while he was out running errands and Mom was napping, I worked. My primary task was to create the physical dossier. Digital files were essential, but I knew the visceral impact of a thick stack of paper in a courtroom. Late one night, using the excuse of a looming work deadline, I drove to a 24-hour coffee shop. In the sterile, fluorescent hum of the empty store, I printed everything: the fraudulent loan agreements, the statements from Patriot Trust, the screenshots of his high-risk investment accounts. I compiled my own spreadsheet, a detailed log of every instance of verbal, emotional, and financial abuse I could remember, with dates, times, and specific quotes. The printer turned out page after page. Holding the finished product, a thick 3-inch stack of his crimes, felt like holding a bomb. It was heavy, real, and undeniable. I placed it in a secure document bag and hid it in the trunk of my car. Rick's abuse, now that he believed I was thoroughly cowed, became casual, almost conversational. He was a cat toying with a stunned mouse. Every evening was a fresh exhibition of his authority. "Still haven't found a new place?" he'd ask, knowing full well my fumigation was a 3-day affair. "I guess the real world is tougher than you thought. Without your mother's checkbook to fall back on." He'd critique my cooking, my choice of television shows, the way I loaded the dishwasher. Each comment was a small jab, a constant reminder of my place in his hierarchy. At the very bottom, I absorbed it all. My face was a mask of weary resignation, my hand occasionally drifting up to touch the cool metal bird at my throat. I was waiting. The moment came on the third night. My mother, tired and in pain from overexerting herself, had gone to bed early. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counters, the last task of the day before I could retreat to the sofa. Rick came in, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "You know, your mother was doing a lot better before you came back," he said, swirling the amber liquid. "You bring a cloud into this house, Grace, a storm of neediness. It's exhausting." I didn't reply, just kept wiping the counter in smooth, even strokes. My silence enraged him more than any argument ever could. It was a denial of his power. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he snapped. I stopped wiping and slowly turned to face him, my hands flat on the counter behind me. "What do you want, Rick?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I want respect," he said, taking a step closer. The smell of whiskey was sharp. "I want you to stop moping around my house like a ghost, poisoning my wife with your misery. You're a grown woman. Why are you still hanging around, feeding off your mother like a teenager?" "My apartment is being fumigated," I said, reciting my line. "It's always something with you, isn't it? An excuse, a problem." "You're the problem," he said, his voice rising. He took another step. He was in my space now, looming over me. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My training kicked in. My thumb and forefinger found the pendant. I kept my hand low, out of his line of sight. Double tap. I pressed the bird's chest twice. A tiny, silent signal sent out into the night. You have no idea what it takes to run a home, to care for someone, he spat, jabbing a finger toward my face. You just take. You took $17,000 of your own money, and threw it at a problem, just to make yourself feel important. To make me look small. I did it for Mom, I said, my voice trembling for real this time. You did it for you, he roared, his face turning a blotchy red. And you will never do it again. His hand flew up. It wasn't a surprise this time. I saw it coming. I had baited him, and he had taken it. The slap was just as hard, just as shocking. The crack of it was just as loud in the quiet kitchen. My head snapped back, and the familiar fiery sting exploded across my other cheek. This time, I let a single tear roll down my face. I let out a small, broken sob. I gave him the reaction he craved. He watched me, his chest heaving, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He had put me back in my place. He backed away, took a long swallow of his whiskey, and walked out of the room without another word. I stood there for a long moment, my cheek burning, my whole body shaking. But inside, I was a block of ice. I waited until I heard the television click on in the living room. Then I went to my bag, pulled out the docking station for the pendant, and walked into the guest bathroom, locking the door behind me. I plugged it into the wall. A tiny blue light blinked, indicating it was uploading. I pulled out my laptop and logged on. I opened the shared Dropbox folder. Inside were two subfolders, DM Miller MPD and S. Richland Esquire. My cousin had referred me to a shark of a lawyer. The file from the necklace appeared on my desktop. Audio stream 100325. I renamed it with cold precision, 202510 Rick Assault Threat Live Wire Wave. I dragged the file into the Dropbox. I watched the progress bar turn green. Upload complete. Rick thought he was winning, battering me into submission with his words and his fists. He had no idea that every night, I was sending a report from the front lines. He didn't know that every threat he made, every insult he hurled, was being logged, catalogued, and delivered to the very people who would one day watch him fall. He thought I was alone and crying in the bathroom. But I wasn't alone. I had a team. And I wasn't just crying. I was filing my report. The audio files were the voice of the beast, and the financial records were its skeleton. But a case, a real one, needed more. It needed a body. It needed a chorus of voices to drown out Rick's carefully constructed narrative of a devoted husband. The silent witnesses had to speak. My first meeting was with Eleanor Gable, the widow who lived next door. She was a bird-like woman in her 70s who spent most of her days tending her prize-winning roses. I knew she had heard things. The walls in these suburban houses are paper-thin. I caught her as she was bringing in her mail and asked if I could speak with her over coffee somewhere neutral. She looked startled, her eyes darting towards our house as if Rick might materialize on the lawn, but she agreed, suggesting a small cafe downtown. We sat in a booth in the back, the air thick with the smell of coffee and baked goods. For a few minutes, we made small talk about her roses and the unseasonably warm autumn. Then I took a breath. Mrs. Gable, I began, my voice low. I know this is an uncomfortable position to put you in, but I need to ask you about what you may have heard coming from my mother's house over the past few years. Her hands wrapped around her mug trembled slightly. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Oh dear, I don't like to get involved in neighbors' affairs. It's not my place. Normally, I would agree, I said, leaning forward. But my mother is not safe. I am building a legal case to protect her, And what you've heard could be a vital part of that. I'm not asking you to get involved. I'm asking you to help. I slid a single photograph across the table. It was the one I'd taken of my bruised face after he'd hit me in the kitchen. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her gaze finally lifted to meet mine, and her eyes were filled with a terrible, dawning guilt. "Oh, you poor child," she whispered. Yes, I've heard things. Shouting, a lot of shouting, always his voice. So loud, so angry. Her voice dropped even lower. And sometimes I've heard sounds like things breaking, a crash, and I've heard crying. Not loud, just after the shouting stops, a very quiet crying. Did you ever think of calling someone? I asked, my tone gentle, not accusatory. She looked down at her hands, ashamed. I told myself it was just a married couple's quarrel. He is always so polite when I see him. He helps me with my garbage cans. I thought. I didn't want to be a busybody. I didn't want to cause trouble. You didn't cause this trouble, Mrs. Gable. He did, I said firmly. Would you be willing to sign a sworn statement, an affidavit detailing what you just told me and possibly, if it comes to it, testify to it in court? She looked terrified. The idea of facing Rick, of being a public witness, was clearly horrifying to her. She stared at the photo of my face on the table. She looked out the window. After a long minute, she turned back to me, and the fear in her eyes had been replaced by a steely resolve I hadn't expected. My late husband, Arthur, was a good man, a quiet man. He never would have. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I will. It's the right thing to do. My second visit was to the local branch of the bank where my mother had kept her personal savings account for over 30 years. I made an appointment with the branch manager, a man named David Harrison. I presented myself not as a vigilante daughter, but in my professional capacity. I wore my best suit. My hair was in a severe bun, and I brought a briefcase. Mr. Harrison, I began. I am an internal auditor, and I'm conducting a private financial review on behalf of my mother, Linda Madsen. I have reason to believe she is a victim of ongoing financial elder abuse. He immediately became guarded, citing privacy policies and client confidentiality. I expected that. I understand completely, I said, opening my briefcase. I am not here to ask for account information. I am here to provide you with information and to ask about a specific point of bank policy. I laid out a copy of one of the forged loan documents. This is a loan taken out in my mother's name. My forensic analysis indicates the signature is a forgery. The funds were never used for their stated purpose and were diverted to an external account belonging to her husband, Rick Madsen. Harrison's face was a mask of professionalism, but I saw a flicker in his eyes. He had seen this before. Now for my question regarding policy, I continued, my voice calm and even. Could you tell me what is the bank's procedure if a third party, even a spouse, attempts to gain sole signatory authority or be added as a power of attorney to an account without the primary account holder being physically present? His posture shifted. That would be a flagrant violation of protocol, he said stiffly. The primary account holder must always be present with valid identification and sign the authorization forms in the presence of a bank officer. And if someone were to attempt it anyway, say a husband claiming his wife was too ill to come in, but that she had sent him on her behalf. He stared at me, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He was remembering that the request would be denied and the incident would be noted in the account's internal file. Has such an incident ever been noted on Linda Madsen's account? I asked, holding his gaze. He couldn't tell me, but his silence was an answer. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Rick had tried it. He had come into the bank and tried to seize total control, and his attempt had been thwarted, and, more importantly, logged. "Mr. Harrison," I said, sliding my card across the desk. "My mother's attorney will be petitioning for an emergency conservatorship. That internal file note could be crucial in proving a pattern of coercive financial control. We will be sending a subpoena for those records." He picked up my card, his face grim. "I will, of course, comply with any legally binding subpoena," he said. It was all I needed. Another witness, another brick in the wall I was building around Rick. My final meeting was the most difficult. "Dr. Sharma," I said, sitting in her quiet, calming office. "I am here because I have a grave concern for my mother's well-being. She is in a psychologically and financially abusive marriage. I know you cannot discuss her sessions with me, but I need you as a therapist to be aware of the context of her home life as you treat her." I gave her a brief, factual overview, omitting the more violent details and focusing on the control, the isolation, and the financial fraud. "I have evidence of all of this," I concluded, "and I am pursuing legal intervention. I just wanted you to know that the anxiety or depression she may be presenting is not just post-operative. It is situational. It is a response to trauma." Dr. Sharma listened with incredible focus, her expression a mixture of compassion and professional seriousness. "Thank you for telling me this, Grace," she said. "It is helpful context, as you know. If I have reason to believe my patient is in imminent danger, or is a victim of abuse, I am a mandated reporter." "I know," I said, "and I believe she is." I left her office feeling a profound sense of shift. The puzzle pieces were no longer scattered. They were locking into place, forming a picture so clear and ugly it was nauseating. A neighbor who heard the terror. A banker who saw the fraud. A therapist who could now contextualize the trauma. It was a clear, documented pattern. The model of financial and psychological violence that my cousin Sarah had talked about was no longer a theory. It was a prosecutable case. I had what I needed. The silent witnesses were ready to speak, and their testimony would be the foundation for the only thing that could save my mother now, a full, immediate, and legally binding financial freeze. The first stage of the checkmate was set. The house was a tinderbox, dry and silent, waiting for a spark. Every piece was in place. The lawyer was on standby. Detective Miller had his team in a van parked 2 streets over, monitoring the feed from the silver bird around my neck. The witnesses had given their statements. All that was left was the final overt act. All that was left was for Rick to incriminate himself so completely, so violently, that no one, not a judge, not a jury, and especially not my mother, could deny the truth. Tonight was the night. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me, the kind of hyper-focused clarity I get just before a major audit presentation. The outcome was certain. Only the process remained. Mom had gone to bed, leaving a tense quiet in her wake. Rick was in his recliner, watching a cable news show, the angry voices of the pundits filling the room. This was his nightly ritual, a baptism in outrage. I went to the kitchen and took 2 bottles of beer from the refrigerator. I opened both, the hiss of the caps unnaturally loud in the silence. I walked into the living room and held one out to him. "Beer, Rick?" He looked at me, surprised. My small acts of service had ceased over the last couple of days, as I prepared for this moment. This was a gesture from the old Grace, the compliant one. He took it with a grunt of approval. "About time you started earning your keep." I didn't sit on the couch. I stood, a supplicant before his throne. I let the silence stretch, letting him get comfortable, letting him feel the familiar weight of his power settle back onto his shoulders. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice carefully pitched to sound nervous and ashamed. I messed up badly." He muted the television, giving me his full, undivided attention. His eyes gleamed with a predatory interest. He loved it when I failed. I took a shaky breath. That money, the $17,000 for Mom's surgery. I didn't just pay the hospital. This was the lie my lawyer and I had crafted, a piece of bait designed to be irresistible to a man like Rick. It had to be a confession that mirrored his own sins. I used some of it. I invested it in crypto. I thought I could double it, pay the hospital bill, and have the rest for us, for the house, but I lost it. Rick, I lost almost all of it. His face, which had been relaxed and smug, slowly began to tighten. The muscles in his jaw bunched. He sat up straight in the recliner, the beer bottle held in a white-knuckled grip. You what? He whispered, his voice dangerously soft. I thought I could help, I stammered, twisting my hands together. This guy I know. He said it was a sure thing. And I just wanted to contribute, to show you that You took your mother's surgery money, he said, each word a chip of ice. And you gambled it away on some internet fantasy. I was going to pay it back. Back? He shot to his feet, a sudden, explosive movement that sent the recliner rocking violently. You destructive, stupid woman, he roared. And the carefully constructed mask of the community pillar disintegrated into dust. This was the real Rick, the one the camera had seen, the one the wire was made for. You couldn't just pay the bill. You couldn't just do the one decent thing. You had to try and be smart. You had to try and be like me. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. He was accusing me of his own reckless behavior. You are a cancer in this house, he screamed, taking a step toward me. His face was purple with rage, a vein throbbing in his temple. Everything was fine. Everything was peaceful until you brought your chaos back here. He was closing the distance between us. My heart hammered against my ribs. My skin went cold. My thumb found the pendant. Asterisk now. No, not yet. Wait for the threat. Asterisk. I'm sorry, I whispered, letting my eyes fill with tears. I hated the weakness I was projecting, but I knew it was the fuel for his fire. Apologizing won't undo the damage, he snapped. He was looming over me now, his presence overwhelming. He pointed sharply at me, his other hand wrapped tightly around a beer bottle, knuckles white. You think you can just stroll in here and wreck everything I've worked for, sabotage my marriage from the inside? I'm done playing along. Maybe now you'll finally understand what it means to stay silent. He drew his arm back, not the one with the bottle, but his open hand. I knew what was coming. And then he gave me the gift. He gave me the checkmate. I made your mother silent for 15 years, he hissed, his voice dropping to a terrifying, conspiratorial whisper, his face inches from mine. You think I won't make you silent? 2. It was a confession and a threat, all in one beautiful, horrific sentence. He was admitting to the years of abuse and promising me the same. As his arm started to move, as the muscles in his shoulder tensed for the blow, I double-tapped the bird. The world seemed to slow down. I saw the rage in his eyes, the curl of his lip, the slight flare of his nostrils. I saw the trajectory of his hand, as it began its vicious arc toward my face. And then a sound. Knock. 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 3 hard, formal raps on the front door. The sound was so unexpected, so alien in this moment of primal rage, that it broke the spell. Rick froze, his hand still raised, his head snapping toward the door. Confusion, then fury, warred on his face. Who the hell is that? He snarled. He stomped to the door and flung it open. Standing on the porch were 2 uniformed police officers, calm and implacable. Behind them, I could see Detective Miller. Rick Madsen, the first officer said, his voice a flat, official monotone. What do you want? Rick demanded, his body still vibrating with aggression. "Sir, you're under arrest for domestic assault." Before Rick could even process the words, they moved. It was a fluid, practiced motion. They bypassed his blustering, stepped inside, and each took an arm. Rick roared, a sound of pure, impotent fury, and tried to struggle, but it was useless. They were stronger, and they had the law on their side. They twisted his arms behind his back, and the click of the handcuffs was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began, pushing a stunned Rick against the wall. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the familiar words of the Miranda warning filled the house, I saw Detective Miller step inside, holding a document. "We have a warrant to search the premises," he said, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second. It was a look of grim confirmation. "We got him. And that's when I heard a small whimpering sound from the hallway. My mother stood there, clutching her nightgown, her face a pale, horrified mask in the dim light. She must have woken at the first shout. She had seen everything. She had seen him lunge at me. She had seen his hand raised to strike. She had seen the mask not just slip, but be torn away completely. She stared at the scene, the man she had defended for years being cuffed against her floral wallpaper, the police officers moving with calm authority through her home. She looked at me, at the tear tracks on my cheek, at the silver bird hanging at my throat. He saw her then. "Linda," Rick cried out, his voice a desperate plea. Tell them this is a mistake. It's her. She's the one. She set me up." My mother opened her mouth to speak. I saw the familiar, reflexive impulse to protect him, to smooth it over, to make the excuse. I saw 15 years of denial flicker in her eyes. But this time, the words wouldn't come. The lie was too big. The truth was too loud. Her face crumpled. Her legs gave out. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She just slid down the wall and collapsed onto the floor in a heap, her body finally surrendering to a weight she had carried for far too long. For the first time, she had nothing to say in his defense. The wire had cracked him open, and in doing so, it had finally broken her silence. The aftermath of the arrest was a strange blend of chaos and clinical procedure. One moment, the house was a stage for a violent domestic drama. The next, it was a crime scene. While uniformed officers led Rick away, his final desperate pleas to my mother swallowed by the night, a forensics team began a quiet, methodical search of the house, sanctioned by the warrant. They documented the shattered mug, took photographs of the kitchen, and confiscated Rick's computer from his study. Through it all, I knelt on the floor beside my mother, who remained a crumpled heap in the hallway. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing, her face a blank canvas of shock. The fortress of her denial had been breached, and its sole inhabitant had simply shut down. She didn't speak a word. The hours that followed are a blur. Paramedics came and checked my mother's vitals, speaking to her in low, soothing tones she didn't seem to hear. Detective Miller asked me questions, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. As I walked him through the events of the evening, I handed him the silver bird pendant, which now felt impossibly heavy. He placed it in an evidence bag with a quiet reverence. By the time the sun began to streak the sky with grey light, the house was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. The oppressive, fearful quiet was gone, replaced by a hollow, echoing emptiness. My lawyer's name was Susan Richland, and she was a force of nature. I was in her office at 9 o'clock that morning, running on caffeine and adrenaline. I had the physical dossier with me, the 3-inch thick stack of paper that represented Rick's entire shadow life. My mother had been admitted to the hospital overnight for observation, a doctor citing acute psychological distress. She was safe. She was away from him. Now it was time to build the cage. They are holding him on a 72-hour domestic violence hold pending arraignment, Susan said, her eyes scanning the top page of my report, an executive summary I had prepared. That gives us a window. We need to move on the conservatorship now, while he's still in the system and can't interfere. For the next several hours, her office became a war room. We drafted the ex-party motion for a temporary conservatorship, a request to the court to act immediately and without the other party present. Given the extreme circumstances, my job was to provide the ammunition. I sat with Susan and her paralegal, walking them through my audit trail. The professional in me took over, a welcome numbness settling over my frayed emotions. Here, I said, pointing to a highlighted line on a spreadsheet I'd projected onto the conference room wall. You can see the monthly $500 withdrawal from my mother's pension account, coded as HNG maint. And here, I clicked, bringing up the corresponding statements from Rick's Secret Patriot Trust account, are the deposits arriving on the same day every month for 24 months. I showed them the forged loan applications next to a scanned copy of my mother's real signature. I pulled up the statements from the shady crypto platforms, showing how the loan money was funneled in and subsequently lost. I played them the first audio recording, the one from the USB charger, where Rick threatened me after discovering I'd paid the hospital bill. Finally, I provided the transcript of last night's wire. The damning sentence underlined in red, I made your mother silent for 15 years. You think I won't make you silent? 2. Susan sat back, a slow, grim smile spreading across her face. Grace, she said, her voice filled with a kind of awe. In 20 years of family law, I have never been handed a more perfect, self-contained case of financial and psychological abuse. You haven't just given me a smoking gun. You've given me the gun, the bullet, the ballistics report, and a notarized confession. By that afternoon, we were standing before a judge in an emergency hearing. Rick wasn't there. He was represented by a harried-looking public defender, who had been given our mountain of evidence only an hour before. He could offer no real defense. Susan was magnificent. She laid out the case with cold, brutal efficiency. She spoke of the pattern of control, the isolation, the documented fraud, and the escalating violence culminating in a direct threat against my life, captured by a police-monitored wire. The judge, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes, read my affidavit and scanned the key pieces of evidence. She listened to the crucial snippet of the audio file. She didn't hesitate. Effective immediately, she declared, her voice ringing with authority. A temporary restraining order is granted, prohibiting Mr. Madsen from any and all contact with Linda Madsen and Grace Langston. Furthermore, the court grants the petition for a temporary conservatorship. Ms. Langston is appointed as temporary conservator of her mother's estate. All joint and personal accounts held by Rick Madsen and Linda Madsen are hereby frozen, pending a full hearing. Mr. Madsen's access to all financial assets is suspended. The sound of the gavel striking the wood felt like a physical blow, a shock wave that seemed to realign the world. It was done. The cage was locked. Rick's primary weapon, money, had been taken from him. He was neutered, financially and legally. The news of the arrest of a local hero spread through Maplewood like wildfire. Rick Madsen, the church usher, the helpful neighbor, the decorated veteran arrested for domestic assault. The dissonance of it was too juicy for the local news to ignore. My phone, which had been silent, began to buzz with notifications. My name was in the online police blotter. The story was out. That evening, as I sat by my mother's hospital bed, watching her finally sleep a deep, untroubled sleep, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Is this Grace Langston? A woman's voice asked. It was brisk, professional. Who is this? I asked, my guard immediately up. My name is Maria. I'm a reporter with Channel 4 News. I'm covering the arrest of Rick Madsen. I understand you're his stepdaughter, and a key party in the case. I was hoping you'd be willing to sit down for an interview to tell your side of the story. My first instinct was to say no, to recoil from the idea of putting my family's private agony on public display. But then I thought of Rick's fortress of public goodwill. I thought of all the people who would say, not Rick. He's such a good man. I thought of how he had used his public mask to hide his private monstrosities for years. That was his other weapon, his reputation. And it was time to take that away from him, too. Yes, I said, my voice clear and steady. Yes, I will. The courtroom was a theater of beige and somber wood, a sterile environment designed to strip away emotion and leave only the cold, hard bones of fact. It wasn't working. The air was thick with tension, a humming, palpable thing. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Susan, my back straight, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to still their trembling. My mother wasn't there. Susan had insisted it would be too traumatic, and I had agreed. Her healing was more important than her presence. Across the room, Rick sat beside his public defender. He looked nothing like the monster from my kitchen. He was clean-shaven, his hair neatly combed, wearing a suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders, likely borrowed. He looked respectable. He looked wronged. He was performing the role of his life, the martyred husband, falsely accused by a hysterical, vindictive stepdaughter. He met my gaze once, his eyes full of a righteous fury, a look that said, "How dare you do this to me?" I held his stare without flinching until he looked away. The preliminary hearing began, and Rick's defense was exactly what I expected. His lawyer painted me as an unstable, jealous daughter, resentful of the happy life my mother had built with a new man. Rick took the stand and delivered a virtuoso performance. His voice was steady, laced with a convincing sorrow. He claimed I was financially reckless, that the $17,000 for the surgery was just one example of my irresponsibility. He, Rick, was merely the concerned protector of my mother's well-being, the one who had to manage the finances because I couldn't be trusted. And the physical altercations, Ms. Langston alleges, his lawyer asked. Rick shook his head, a look of profound hurt on his face. Never. I have never, ever laid a hand on Grace. I would never harm a woman. I served my country to protect people, not to hurt them. He looked toward the judge, a picture of earnest sincerity. She fell in the kitchen. She can be clumsy. She was hysterical about the money she'd lost, and she slipped. I tried to help her up, and she started screaming that I had hit her. It was a brilliant lie, simple and plausible. He was calm. I was, by his account, hysterical. For a moment, a slither of ice-cold fear pierced my composure. He was so good at this, so believable. Then, Susan rose, the prosecution calls Eleanor Gable to the stand. Mrs. Gable looked tiny and fragile as she made her way to the witness box. But when she took the oath, her voice was surprisingly firm. Susan led her gently through her testimony. Mrs. Gable, in the past year, have you ever been disturbed by noises coming from the Madsen residence? Oh, yes, she said, her hands clutching a small, embroidered handkerchief. Many times. Shouting, always Mr. Madsen's voice, very loud, very angry. It would wake me up sometimes. Did you ever hear anything else? Yes, she whispered. After the shouting would stop, sometimes I'd hear a crash, a loud bang like something being thrown, and then I'd hear crying. Very soft. Mrs. Madsen, I believe. Rick's lawyer tried to discredit her on cross-examination, painting her as a lonely, gossiping widow with a hearing aid and an overactive imagination, but she held her ground. I know what anger sounds like, sir, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. And I know what sadness sounds like. She had planted the seed. Next was David Harrison, the bank manager. Looking deeply uncomfortable in his suit, he confirmed in dry, professional language the bank's internal logs. He testified that on a specific date, Rick Madsen had attempted to have himself made sole signatory on his wife's personal accounts, claiming she was too ill to come in herself. He confirmed the request was denied, as it was a violation of bank policy. The respectable financial manager now looked like a thwarted predator. Then came the main event. "Your Honor," Susan announced, her voice resonating with a new gravity. "The prosecution would like to present Exhibit A, a video file recovered from a digital recording device." The courtroom lights dimmed. A large monitor near the jury box flickered to life. The image was my mother's kitchen, seen from the perspective of the silk flowers on the counter. The room was silent, waiting. Then the figures of my mother and Rick appeared. We all watched as my mother asked for her credit card. We watched as Rick's face transformed from a mask of patient condescension into a gargoyle of pure rage. We watched as he grabbed the mug and hurled it against the wall. The sound of it shattering, making several people in the gallery jump. We saw my mother cower, her hands flying to her face in a gesture of pure, instinctual terror. I didn't watch the screen. I watched Rick. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty gray pall. His jaw was slack. His fortress of public goodwill, the character he had so carefully crafted for years, was being burned to the ground in high definition, and he was being forced to watch the blaze. Before the image on the screen could even fade, Susan spoke again, and for Exhibit B, Your Honor, an audio file, a police-monitored recording from the night of the defendant's arrest. The speakers hissed to life. The court heard my shaky false confession about losing money in cryptocurrency. They heard Rick's voice rising in a crescendo of fury. And then the climax. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights as Rick's voice, a low, venomous hiss, slithered from the speakers. "I made your mother silent for 15 years. You think I won't make you silent, too?" The words hung in the air. An absolute, unambiguous confession. It was over. I knew it. Susan knew it. The judge knew it. And most importantly, Rick knew it. The lie was dead. The performance was finished. All that was left was the man, stripped bare of his deceptions, condemned by his own words. His public defender offered a weak, half-hearted rebuttal, but there was nothing to say. The evidence was absolute. The judge didn't deliberate for long. She looked at Rick, her face a study in cold contempt. "Mr. Madsen," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Based on the irrefutable video and audio evidence presented to this court, in addition to the corroborating testimony regarding a pattern of financial and psychological intimidation, I find you guilty of assault in the second degree." A ripple went through the courtroom. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice rising, "your attempts to seize control of your wife's assets, as testified by Mr. Harrison, and your own recorded admission of long-term coercion, are clear violations of the spirit, if not yet the letter, of the temporary conservatorship placed upon you. It shows a profound and dangerous disregard for the law and for the well-being of your wife." She looked down at her papers. "Bail is denied. A permanent order of protection is hereby issued. You are to have no contact, direct or indirect, with Grace Langston or Linda Madsen. Sentencing will be scheduled." The gavel fell. It was a flat, final sound. Two bailiffs moved to stand behind Rick. He seemed to shrink inside his borrowed suit, as they put his hands behind his back to cuff him. He turned his head and looked directly at me. The performance was gone. The fake sorrow, the righteous indignation, all of it had vanished. All that was left in his eyes was a look of pure, bottomless hatred. It was the look of a king whose castle had been conquered, not by an army, but by a single, patient accountant who had finally tallied up the score. He had lost, and he knew with chilling certainty exactly who had beaten him. I came home, Not to the house in Maplewood that smelled of secrets and lemon polish, but to my own apartment, my sanctuary, a place where every object was chosen, every book was in its place, and the only voice you could hear was the quiet hum of the city 10 floors below. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like a temporary shelter. It felt like home again. On my polished dining table, the one I used as a desk, sat a thick, pristine white document box. It contained a complete copy of the case file, every motion, every piece of evidence, every witness statement, the photographs of my bruised face, the audio transcripts, the damning video file. It was all there. A meticulous record of a war fought in whispers and spreadsheets. I picked up a black marker and wrote on the label in neat block letters, the first and the last time. It was a promise, the first time I had ever fully fought back, and the last time I would ever need to. I stored the box on the top shelf of my closet, a closed account, a finished audit. I didn't need to look at it again. The numbers had been reconciled, the balance paid in full. There was no joy in it, no thrill of victory, just a profound, quiet, and bone-deep sense of relief. The kind of relief that comes after a long fever breaks, leaving you weak, but blessedly clear-headed. My job had been to find the discrepancy, to expose the fraud that was bleeding my family dry. I had done my job. My mother's healing was a slower, more complicated ledger. She was living in a quiet residential treatment facility for now, a gentle place with gardens and afternoon therapy sessions. I visited her every other day, and our conversations were tentative, fragile things. We didn't talk about Rick directly. We talked about the weather, the nurses, the surprisingly good food, but slowly she was beginning to audit her own life. One afternoon, sitting in a sun-drenched common room, she turned to me, her hands folded in her lap. "Dr. Sharma said something to me today," she said, her eyes focused on a bird bathing in a fountain outside. "She said that silence can be a type of cage that you can lock yourself inside. Thinking you're keeping a monster out, but all you've really done is trap yourself in the dark with it." She looked at me then, her eyes clearer than I had seen them in years. "I was in the dark for a long time, wasn't I, Gracie?" "We both were." "Mom," I said, and reached out to take her hand. Her fingers were warm, and for the first time, they squeezed back with a strength that felt like her own. It was the beginning of her reconciliation. As for me, the gnawing anxiety that had been my constant companion for years was gone. The feeling of always waiting for the other shoe to drop, of flinching at raised voices, of measuring my every word to avoid setting off a landmine, it had vanished. I had kept the promise I'd made to myself in the dark of that kitchen, my cheek stinging from his hand. I would never again pay in blood for my kindness. My help was a gift, not a debt that required me to offer my own well-being as collateral. The world was no longer a place of hidden threats, but a place of columns and rows, assets and liabilities, and my own peace of mind was now the most important asset on my balance sheet, one I would protect with the ferocity of a seasoned auditor guarding the company vault. The final entry in the ledger came a few weeks later. On the day of his sentencing, I was there, not for him, but for me, to close the book. He was sentenced to 5 years with eligibility for parole in 3. The judge cited the overwhelming evidence of calculated cruelty and a complete lack of remorse. As they led him out of the courtroom in his orange jumpsuit, he stopped. He turned, his eyes finding mine across the gallery. The mask was gone forever. There was no performance left, just the raw, ugly core of the man. His face was a contorted mask of hatred. "You set me up," he spat, the words a venomous whisper that carried across the quiet room. "You baited me." This was all a trap. The bailiffs tugged on his arm. But his eyes were locked on mine, demanding a reaction, an argument, a final fight. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to give him the satisfaction of knowing he could still wound me. I didn't. I stood up, my hands steady at my sides. I looked at the man who had haunted my life, the man who had stolen my mother's name and my own sense of safety, and I gave him the final, simple, unassailable truth. My voice was calm, clear, and carried the quiet authority of a fact that could not be disputed. I only turned on the recorder when you raised your hand. The bruise on my cheek faded from a violent purple to a sickly yellow-green, but the fire it had lit inside me only burned hotter, steadier. The rage was no longer a wild, helpless thing. It had cooled, hardened, and sharpened into a tool. In my line of work, emotion is a liability. But process is a weapon. I decided to stop being Rick Madsen's victim and start being his auditor. The audit starts at home. My field office was the lumpy pull-out sofa in the living room. My work hours began after the house went dark. After the sound of Rick's self-satisfied snoring rumbled down the hallway, armed with my laptop and a burner phone for a secure Wi-Fi hotspot, I went to work. The first rule of any audit is to understand the system. Rick's system was his study, a small, obsessively neat room where he managed his kingdom. He was careless in his arrogance. He assumed no one would ever dare to question him, so his password was a predictable combination of his army unit and the year he was discharged. It took me less than 5 minutes to guess it. Once I was inside his digital fortress, I found his masterpiece of control, a series of intricate spreadsheets tracking every cent that flowed in and out of their lives. Mom's social security, her small pension from the dress shop she'd worked at for 20 years, his own veterans' benefits. It was all there. Categorized and cross-referenced. I saw the weekly cash allowance he gave her, logged to the penny. I saw the bills, the mortgage, the property taxes. On the surface, it looked like the work of a fiscally responsible, if slightly obsessive, man, but an auditor looks for anomalies. I was looking for the ghost in the machine. The first thread appeared in a folder labeled Investments. It was tucked away, not linked to the main budget spreadsheet. Inside, I found a series of PDF statements from a bank I'd never heard of, Patriot Trust Financial. It was an online-only bank, the kind that promised high returns with minimal oversight. The account was in Rick's name only, and every month for the past 2 years, a recurring transfer of $500 was moved from my mother's primary checking account into this secret one. The memo line on the transfers was always the same, HNG maint home and garden maintenance. He was skimming from her, bleeding her dry with 1,000 tiny cuts, and disguising it as an expense for lawn care and gutter cleaning. The total was over $12,000. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold, clinical fury rising in my throat. I downloaded every statement, every transaction history, saving them to a multi-encrypted USB drive I kept hidden in a hollowed-out tube of lipstick. The work was slow, meticulous. I moved the mouse with the delicate precision of a bomb disposal expert, terrified the slightest errant click would wake the computer from its sleep mode and alert him. The next discovery was worse. In his email, I searched for the names of the investment platforms mentioned in the Patriot Trust statements. They had names that sounded both patriotic and vaguely predatory. Liberty First Holdings, Apex Founders Group. They weren't legitimate investment firms. A quick search on my burner phone revealed they were high-risk, unregulated startup incubators, little more than digital casinos for suckers. He was taking my mother's retirement money, the money she'd earned standing on her feet for 30 years, her fingers raw from needles and pins, and gambling it on digital mirages. He wasn't just controlling. He was a reckless, incompetent fraud. The final damning piece of evidence was in the tall metal filing cabinet in the corner of the study. He kept it locked, of course, but Rick was a creature of habit. The key was in the small ceramic dish on his dresser, where he emptied his pockets every night. One morning, after he'd left to play golf, I let myself into their bedroom, my hands shaking as I lifted the small brass key. Inside the cabinet, under loans, I found 2 folders. They were personal loans taken out over the past 18 months, totaling $25,000. The borrower's name on the paperwork was Linda Madsen, my mother. The purpose listed was home renovations, but the house hadn't been renovated. The kitchen faucet still dripped, and the paint in the hallway was peeling. The money had simply vanished. I knew with a certainty that made me sick where it had gone. It was seed money for his disastrous investments. But the worst part, the part that made the room spin, was the signature on the loan applications. I pulled out my phone and took a high-resolution photo of the signature line. Later that night, I compared it to her signature on an old birthday card I kept in my wallet. It wasn't even a good forgery. He'd mimicked the slant of her letters, but the pressure was all wrong, too heavy, too aggressive. The elegant loop of her L was clumsy and cramped. He hadn't just stolen her money. He'd stolen her name, her identity, her legal consent. He had made her a criminal without her knowledge. This was the checkmate. Physical abuse was his word against mine, something my mother would deny. But financial fraud. Forged signatures on legal documents. That was a different language. That was the language of evidence, of proof, of numbers that did not lie. I documented everything with the dispassionate focus of a seasoned professional. I took photos of the loan documents, the forged signatures, the statements. I took screenshots of the suspicious emails and the online banking portals. I created a detailed audit trail, a spreadsheet of my own, linking his secret account to the fraudulent loans, cross-referencing dates, times, and amounts. It was a beautiful, terrible tapestry of his deceit. I knew I had the evidence, but I didn't have a strategy. This was beyond just calling the police. I needed a plan. I needed a legal framework. That's when I thought of my cousin Sarah. She was a paralegal at a family law firm downtown. We weren't close, but we were blood. I called her from my burner phone, standing in the cold night air of the backyard. "Sarah, it's Grace," I said, my voice low. "I need some advice. It's hypothetical." I laid out a sanitized version of the situation, speaking in the third person, referring to a friend who had discovered her stepfather was financially exploiting her mother. Sarah listened patiently. "This isn't hypothetical, is it, Grace?" she asked gently when I was done. "No," I whispered. "Okay," she said, her voice all business. "What you're describing is financial elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. Your friend needs a lawyer yesterday, but more than that, she needs to protect her mother's assets immediately. Has she ever heard of a conservatorship hearing?" I hadn't. She explained it to me. It was a legal proceeding where a judge could appoint a responsible person, a conservator, to manage the financial and personal affairs of an individual who is deemed incapable of doing so themselves, often due to age, illness, or undue influence from a third party. "You can petition the court for an emergency hearing," Sarah explained. "If you have enough proof, a judge can grant a temporary conservatorship and freeze all the assets. It would cut him off completely, immediately. But Grace, your proof has to be ironclad. You need a perfect paper trail." A chill went down my spine, but it was a thrill of validation. A perfect paper trail. That was my native tongue. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had a name for my goal. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was a rescue. I wasn't just trying to punish Rick. I was going to legally erase him from my mother's life, one exhibit at a time. The audit was complete. The next phase was prosecution.